website, because I'm telling you, Richard Sprengeler, he has his website. Give yourself plenty of time. He's got tons of beautiful things to look at. He's got fabulous work. So instead of me talking, I'm going to just let you take it over and start.
Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay, sorry. I'm Richard Sprengeler. If you're not familiar with me or my work, I'm a photographer. I've lived here in Fairview Heights my entire life almost. In 1978, I went to SWIC after 4 years in the Navy and signed up for Wayne Shaw's photo classes. And I did 2 years with Wayne, and then I went down to Carbondale, SIU Carbondale, and got a bachelor's degree in fine art photography. After that, I spent 20 years doing commercial work in St. Louis at a large studio. If anybody remembers the National Food Stores, I did all the food photography for National Food Store for 20 years.
Wow.
After 20 years of doing commercial work in the studio, one of my favorite subject matters is architecture. And I left there and became an architectural photographer. And even though I did commercial work for 40 years, the real reason that I'm in photography is my training is in fine art photography. And producing fine art photographs is what is my thing, I guess. How I got into photography, at 17, I graduated from high school. I'm a jazz trombonist. I auditioned for the Navy music program and passed. And my second 2 years out of 4 in the Navy, I was stationed in Europe. And I toured Europe for 2 years nonstop. And I was introduced to the architecture of Europe. And I had this little Instamatic camera with a flash cube on top, if anybody remember those things. There was an amateur photographer in the band and said, you need to get a 35mm camera and start shooting slides. And I did that. And I started sending things back to my mom, who was an artist, and she said, you've got a pretty good eye. You should take a photo class when you get out. And so in 1978, I came back and took Wayne Shaw's photography class. And like most of the photographers of my era, the first image of a print magically appearing in the darkroom sink is what hooked me. I love digital printing, but there's something about seeing that image come up that's mesmerizing. So architecture and landscape are my two favorite subject matters. The way this new body of work started is I was photographing on McLeod's Landing the last summer, and I was inside the McLeod Power Building, and a young man came up behind me, and I was the only one in the building, and I was trespassing in there, and he scared me when he said something to me. And I turned around, and he was a young man with a drone, and his hobby was flying drones around abandoned spaces. And he says, have you been to Cementland? And I said, no. He says, you gotta go. And he took out his phone and he showed me photographs from the air that he had taken. And he introduced me to all of the buildings, and he even showed me how to sneak into the property. Now, I'm not encouraging trespassing, but if you do it, just be careful and hide your car. So the next day I was up there, and I told some friends of mine that I was going to start photographing Cementland, and a friend of mine sent me an article from the St. Louis Business Journal that day that said Cementland, it had been abandoned for 10 years at least, and he said it had just been sold to a developer who was going to probably demolish it and turn it into some industrial use. And so, in light of that, I knew that I had a limited amount of time. Normally, sometimes I take 2 years to do a project, and I knew that I had a month or maybe even less to do this. So I just started working as hard as I could. If you're not familiar with, is anybody not familiar with Bob Castley and the City Museum in St. Louis? Bob Castley was an eccentric artistic genius who built the City Museum in St. Louis that is one of the most incredible places you've ever seen. He built the Turtle Park right across from the zoo, and his favorite medium was concrete. He bought this abandoned cement processing plant. He drove by there on his bike one morning, and he saw these open silos and buildings, and he thought, wow, that would be an interesting place to turn into an adventure theme park. So he bought the property. Cementland had been an abandoned, at one time when it was open, it was the largest cement producing facility in the country. I I think it started maybe in the 20s or 30s, and so a lot of these buildings are pretty old. And he worked on it for 10 years until his tragic death in a bulldozer accident. And I talked to one of his employees who worked with him every day for 10 years, and he gave me the scoop on what happened to Bob. So in the questions and the question and answer at the end, if you would like to know something about, you know, what happened to Bob, I've got some information on it. What he wanted to do is to turn this into an adventure park where he was fascinated with ancient civilizations, and so at one part of the park he was building a castle complex that was reminiscent of feudal Europe. He also built a Chinese pagoda in the middle of a lagoon. And the most extraordinary thing about the park is that he built the largest mound in North America, purposely larger than Monk's Mound and Cahokia Mounds. He built another mound on the other side of the park, and he was building bridges from the mounds to the silos to the mounds. He wanted visitors to circumnavigate the whole park 150 feet off the ground. In the middle of the park, he built a huge lagoon that surrounded a lot of the structures and some of the silos, and he wanted people to actually canoe around the buildings and into the buildings. There's one set of silos where you could canoe into it, and he broke through all 4 silos, so you can go through all 4 silos and back out again. And so it was an adventure park. There was a 200-foot smokestack that he was going to build a circular staircase all the way up to the top so that people could climb up and throw rocks off the top. He never lost his childhood persona, you know, and I don't think his parents ever told him when he was a child that, Bob, you can't do that. If something came into his mind, he would do it. I'd like to show some videos first that I took with my iPhone. That gives you a pretty good idea of what the park looked like. It was 52 acres. This is in the main processing facility. It's a huge building. It's probably one of the biggest buildings in St. Louis. You could easily put a football field in here. And you can see these funnels hanging out of the ceiling where raw material or cement powder would come down. This is all done with my iPhone. You know, Bob Castley died here, and it was an inherently very dangerous place to be. Look at these holes in the floor. Some of these holes went down 5 floors to concrete.
Wow.
Right here, you can see where he, with his welding torch, he cut out this huge funnel. You can see the cut line here. And just imagine what that sounded like when that thing let loose and hit the floor beneath him. I think he may have gotten addicted to the adrenaline rush of working on these things.
Excuse me, this is from a different location in the museum?
Yes, this is an abandoned cement plant in North St. Louis.
Okay, thank you.
It's on Riverview Drive, 5 miles south of 270. And
Where Adelaide picks up, Riverview and Adelaide?
it's at Scranton Avenue.
Okay.
This is in the main processing facility. You can see my 4x5 inch view camera right here. It's a huge space.
Did he get a good deal on it?
He probably got it for almost nothing.
He had a reputation
Everything that Castley constructed, he didn't pay for. Everything was salvaged materials. And right here, you can see he wanted to open the space up so light would come in. So he cut the girder out here. You know, these girders that hold up a concrete floor. And he cut the girder out and made a huge doorway. You can see the ceiling bowing right up here.
Yeah.
You know, when I go through this building, I always thought, how is he ever gonna get this to pass inspection for the public to come in here? Here's outside the main processing facility. Here's a large tunnel. I'm gonna make a video going down. Went down deep into the ground, and raw material would be dumped down into this room, and a conveyor belt would bring it up the tunnel into the main building. Coming up on the left, you can see the largest mound in North America. Here's the smokestack. Here's the top of the mound right here. There's a 5-story set of silos here that are being buried by the mound. Here's another set of silos.
So is all of that part of the 52 acres?
Uh-huh.
And it's sitting empty now?
It's been destroyed. A new owner bought it and demolished the site. Beelman Trucking Company, I believe, bought it. Okay, this is gonna go down that long tunnel into an underground subterranean room. So this is slanting, going down, and Castley busted through the concrete here. And this is the ground level coming up.
And you're walking through
I'm walking through it, yeah.
a lot.
Here's my 4x5-inch view camera that I took 75% of the work with. It shoots film, black and white film, 4x5 inches, but I also use a 35mm digital, a point-and-shoot digital, and an iPhone. And I'm using the iPhone right now. And this tunnel was a lot darker than what this looks like. I could hardly see anything, and so it was kind of, you know, there was things on the floor that I was kicking. I was just hoping that I wasn't gonna fall walking down this dark tunnel. So this goes to a room that's about 35 feet underground. And up at ground level was a hole where not cement, but dump trucks with limestone would come in and dump the limestone down into this pit. And there was a large 4-foot wide conveyor belt that brought the limestone up the long tunnel and into the building. And here's where the limestone would pour in. You can see the silica dust on the walls here. The whole place was just covered with it's cement dust or silica dust. I met a man in the parking lot once, and he saw me with my camera, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm photographing Cementland. And he said, I knew a guy that worked there his whole life. And I said, I want to talk to him to find out what was going on in this building. And he said, he died of lung cancer. Yeah. Right here is the castle complex that Castley built. An artist in St. Louis, Bill Chrisman, worked with Castley at the City Museum. He built Beatnik Bob's Cafe up on the 2nd floor, and he said, if Castley had been able to finish Cementland, it would have been one of the wonders of the world. This is coming up to the castle complex that he was building.
How long have you been gone when you took this video?
11 years.
Wow.
So the whole site was overgrown when I got in last summer. He put this bridge in right here and built this structure.
Was the castle built out of a set of silos?
It was set up on silos. Here's a pool that he built. On hot summer days, he and his workers would cool off in this pool.
Wow.
I'm gonna stop the video in just a second. You can see the main building there in the distance. Cassie found cut out a funnel from the main processing building, the circular funnel, and inverted it and made it into a roof. But when he put it up there, apparently it rocked a little bit. It wasn't completely even. And there's a car jack right here. Stuck the car jack in there and spread it until it tightened up the roof.
Yeah.
Mind of an artist.
I think the inspector just, his head would have blown off.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got City Museum approved.
I know, right?
True.
Castley said that he had countless lawsuits at the City Museum.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah. 2 people got seriously injured over the period of 20 years, but countless other people were injured too. So here's a bridge that he put in that spans this big gap. And on top of this concrete structure here, he built this building, and look at the doorway that he put in here. I hadn't the slightest idea what this thing was, and I had a long lunch with Kurt Nickmeyer, who worked with Castley every day for 10 years. And he said, that's the chassis to Bob's old bulldozer that bit the dust. He had to get another bulldozer, and he took the old one apart, and when he saw that, he goes, oh, that's a doorway. So he had a huge crane, he lifted it up there and propped it up, and then built a building around it. He got these Gothic windows out of a church somewhere in St. Louis. There was going to be a second floor with a spiral staircase that was never realized. Here's the Chinese pagoda right there, right in the middle of the lagoon. There was no graffiti there when Bob was working on the site. This was all done after he died.
Was there any type of security around it that?
No.
Obviously, people went in.
No, urban explorers have been going in there
So
for,
nobody they didn't care that it was dangerous or anything?
apparently not. Okay, that kind of gives you an idea of the site. I'm gonna go to the exhibition prints now. I have a large show up at the Central Library in downtown St. Louis now of Cementland. And it's up until the 22nd of the month. Okay, this is not my photograph. This is compliments of Wikipedia, but it shows the entire site. You can see St. Louis in the distance and the river. Riverview Drive comes up here. And here's the site. Here's the big processing plant. Here's the castle complex he was building. Here's the largest mound in North America with a pond on top and a beach. Here's a second mound that he built. He was intending for people to come through the building, out of this building, along this mound. There's going to be a bridge over to this silo complex here. You can walk along the top, take a bridge over to the largest mound in North America. Come down, he busted a hole in this silo here where you could, from the top of the mountain, you could go down the silo and through the building. The lagoon was all in this area. This is from Wikipedia again. You can see the lagoon. This is going to be his Chinese pagoda right here. This is a 200-foot tall smokestack. When I photographed it 10 years after his death, metal scavengers came in and stripped anything that was made out of metal off the site, and so all these bridges were gone. You can see a bridge here. There's a bridge here and a bridge here, and there's other bridges around the whole facility, and they're all gone. Castley built this bridge. It was extraordinarily heavy, and there's a story about that I'll tell you about, where Castley almost died on this bridge. And
Hopefully safe.
wait to hear the story. He had arrangements with the large cemeteries in St. Louis to get dead trees. And here's 2 dead cottonwood trees that he brought in, stuck up against this circular structure, and you can see the crane putting an observation platform on top. another one right there. He was gonna put a circular staircase up to it, and I'm sure there's gonna be railings around it. But he didn't take into account that the trees were dead when he bought them. And then they continued to rot, and pretty soon it wasn't safe, and they had to come down. He was also gonna make the whole park into a sculpture park with industrial machines in it. And so he got these machines from different industries in St. Louis, and with his crane lifted them up 40 feet into the air it was gonna be a sculpture park with all machinery. Okay, here's my work. This is taken from Riverview Drive, and if you ever drove by the facility, he had a row of 15 drums from cement trucks lined up. Here is where we saw the subterranean room underneath this. This is where the trucks would pull up and dump their limestone down into the room. And this is the room down there. This is an instance where I should have shot this with digital 35 millimeter, because I shot it with my 4x5, and film and darkness don't go well together. There's a phenomenon called reciprocity failure, where you lose the speed, and the exposure for this photograph with film was 24 minutes. If I would have done it digitally, I probably could have done it in 30 seconds. There's a really funny story about this thing. One of the other things he was going to build that I didn't mention was a 150-foot tall Mayan pyramid. Never realized he died before he could build it. But he got this huge piece of granite from Boeing Corporation. He would get things from industry, and it was a win-win situation for both parties, because the industry would get a tax deduction for contributing to a tax-exempt organization, and Cassidy would get free stuff. So Boeing dropped this thing off, and Cassidy maybe was going to use this for his Mayan pyramid, and he hooked his crane up to it, lifted it a foot, and the crane started to tip over. So he dropped it. He moved the crane over a foot, lifted it again, moved it a foot, the crane started to move over. He dropped it, and after about the third try, he dropped it and gave up. And his worker, Kurt, who I had a long conversation with, and told me all this information, and he said, "Bob, what are you going to do with this thing now?" And in obvious reference to his Mayan pyramid, he said, "Well, maybe we could sacrifice virgins on it." Here's one of the buildings, and you can see how the site was overgrown after his death. The very top of the smokestack in the distance. This is taken from one of those silos, and you can see the main processing facility. There's the huge mound off to the left out of the picture, but leading up to the mound were 3 smaller hills that he built. That he had stairs going up the first one. He was going to put a bridge in between these mounds and the bridge over to the big mound. But what's interesting is right here you can see the teeth of the bulldozer shovel in the soil still, 11 years after his death. I didn't think that would stay there. This is inside the main processing facility. On one half, there's 2 halves to it. One half that you saw in the films was completely empty, but on the other side was all filled with all sorts of stuff. This is in the basement. Unfortunately, people who come in and make graffiti, 99% of it is trash, just scribbling and or vulgarities, but occasionally you get a piece of art, and this is one of those instances. But you know, there's all sorts of vulgarities and a reference to magic mushrooms right here. Here's a different version of that same site. These are molds that Castley made to put a ring, like a crown, around the top of the silos. And you'll see that coming up. I especially enjoyed this booty sitting right up here. This is an instance where I generally don't alter the scenes or make arrangements. In this case, this pipe was mostly out of the picture. And I either needed to take it out or bring it in. And I decided to go ahead and bring it in. And it filled up that negative space and made the composition. Some granite pillars that he was gonna use for something. And metal scavengers came in and took the lids, off of the, can't think of the word of these things. Yeah. So it was a dangerous sight with holes in the floor like this. Kesley had a jackhammer that he busted through these concrete walls, and I envisioned him holding a jackhammer, but actually it was a large machine that was on wheels that you could drive, a big powerful jackhammer that could go straight down and go horizontal and go up, and he used that to make holes. You can see some nice graffiti right here. But this was shot digitally. I got my light meter out and read the shadows, and it was 0. The light meter wouldn't even pick up anything. So I shot this digitally, and I was able to do it in about 30 seconds. This is again in the main processing building, and there's all this dirt in the foreground. And behind me, Kesley bulldozed dirt in and filled up the entire first floor. He was building tunnels through the dirt that you could go through. Notice this I-beam here. It's split, and it's holding up 4 floors of concrete floors. And again, how is he ever gonna get this place approved for the public to come into? Maybe it's some money under the table, I don't know.
When you talked to that worker of his, did you get a perception or an understanding? Did Bob have a master plan, or did he just show up and say, today I think we're gonna work here? And
He showed up. He didn't have anything written down. And that's one of the tragedies, because his workers, after his death, couldn't finish it. By his own admittance, he had depression and ADD. And he was a workaholic, and he said that working kept him from being depressed. So he worked every day, 7 days a week. His workers would be off on the weekend. He'd work all weekend long. He'd be the first thing in the morning, and he'd work until midnight at night sometimes, just work nonstop. But with his ADD, I got the impression that he would work on something, and out of the corner of his eye, he'd see something in the distance. He'd go, oh, that would be cool. And off he is in a different direction.
Right.
And none of these places were really finished.
Right.
Because he was just bouncing around all over the place.
Do you know, was he married?
Twice. Yeah. And I think divorced twice.
That's difficult.
Here's that dirt you saw in the foreground. My camera was right behind this dirt right here. And I don't know what he was going to do with all these big holes in the floor, but this could have been the beginning of the tunnel system through the dirt. And I can imagine maybe a skateboard park or a roller skating park, or there'd be a ramp here going down into these tunnels and then out of the building. It's just a guess, trying to think like Bob Kesley. He cut out the bottom of these funnels. You can see the jagged edge of the welding torch, so you could walk up and look up into these things. I discovered a compositional technique that is really useful in architecture mainly, but it could work in other things too. I got it from Richard Diebenkorn. For the photographers out there, you don't have to just have other photographers as your influences. I've learned a lot from painters. And I saw a Richard Diebenkorn abstract painting where it was all squares and rectangles of different shapes and colors. And all along one side was a long, thin rectangle. And it just intrigued me because it catches your eye and forces your eye to start circular motion around the composition. So I started using that. So you see a thin horizontal here. You see it on the other side, and it forces your eye. Generally, your eye goes in the circular motion anyway, but this is kind of like a fast track for your eye to start going around the composition. And you'll see that quite a bit in these architectural photographs. There used to be a concrete ramp from where I'm standing over to here and over to here, and he took that out for some reason. And enjoy the vanishing point. You know, these funnels lead your eye way into the distance. Here is the tunnels that he was building underneath in the ground, but in the 11 years since his death, the tunnel collapsed and fell over. Here's in the other side, and there's this pillar girder that he took out in order to open it up. And here's another tunnel here. I took you down that other tunnel, but here's a tunnel that goes up and out of the building. So finished product would go into this tunnel and out of the building. Here's another composition of the vanishing point. He was going to fill this entire space with a forest of trees and then make it into a lagoon so you could canoe into here. And there were going to be waterfalls coming off of the walls.
His mind was just running along.
And if it came into his mind, he would do it.
Yeah.
He never thought, I can't do this. That row of funnels that we saw just a couple of pictures ago, these cubicle concrete rooms are right above them. So these would be filled maybe with raw material or finished product that would go down into those funnels. And this is, behind me is that long tunnel that goes down into the ground. And you can still see the roller for the conveyor belt. So the conveyor belt would come out of the tunnel and go all the way down the building with the raw material. And at some point, you know, it would be taken off for processing. I just assumed that this entire space was filled with equipment at one time, but it's empty now. This is part of the machinery that ran the conveyor belt. This is an instance where I couldn't get a tripod down here. So this is my point and shoot, just handheld, and it's sharp. Here's looking down that long tunnel. When I started, one thing I have to say about this photograph is, this one's for you, Wayne. One of my first assignments in 1979 was to go out and shoot lines. And when I saw this scene and I set it up in my view camera, I thought, this is just like my first assignment with Wayne. So, thank you for being part of the inspirations that got me to where I am now. I've got you to thank for a lot of it. Well, anyway, on this one, you can see the silica powder piled up. And even every square inch of this building had silica powder on it. You can just see it on the railing, on the steps. And it wasn't powder anymore. The humidity in St. Louis actually turned it into hard concrete.
Almost like it calcified, like bones get calcified.
Yeah, This was in the corner of the main processing building, and he cut out the funnel, but there was a area down here that was open for pickup trucks to pull up, and material to be dumped down into the pickup trucks, dump trucks. But he cut out the funnel. And I think he did that so that you'd be able to see. He wanted people to see everywhere. Another technique I picked up was having points of triangles touching the edge of the frame. So you see it right here, you see it down here, and it just kind of makes an interesting compositional effect. The tunnel that goes down into the subterranean room is right over here. And this is the tunnel that takes material out of the building. Just looking down into it. He cut the funnels out, and here is a conveyor belt all rolled up right here. This is down in the tunnel. You can see the roof 5 floors above. Again, he was going to make a lagoon out of this, so there is some water still in here. And waterfalls pouring off the sides. I've been doing abstractions for the last 30 years, and whenever I see a scene like this that lends it to it, I just love abstractions. I guess one of the things to define a photographic abstraction is the denial of recognition of subject matter. So whenever something is not recognizable as what it is, it becomes abstract. And I wouldn't say this is a total abstraction, I'd call this a semi-abstraction, because you can tell this is a concrete wall and this is rebar sticking out of it. There's a wall over here, but it's mysterious. You don't know what the space is, you don't know what it was for, and it's not readily apparent, but it's filled with water. Here's the water line. So this is a reflection of everything above it. Same space from a different angle. This one was interesting. I took this with my iPhone, and I picked up a pebble and threw it in the water, and then shot it with the iPhone. For anybody, any photographers out there, there's a shutter speed that best approximates what the eye sees. The eye doesn't see like a waterfall frozen like ice, nor does your eye see something completely smoothed over like a waterfall at night. It sees something in between, a little bit of blur and a little bit of frozen. And the shutter speed that gives you that is a 60th of a second. Years ago, 30 years ago, I tried a shot just like this with my view camera, and I threw a rock in. And with the light and lens and scene at the time, the fastest shutter speed I could get was a 15th. And I knew it was a little bit too slow. And so I shot it anyway, and when I developed the film, the ripples were blurred out almost. So it really does, 2 stops difference from a 15th to a 60th makes a big difference. That being said, I'm not sure what the iPhone gave me here. I suspect it might have been faster than the 60th because it looks pretty frozen. We saw this earlier in the video. And I imagine he might have had circular stairs going down these holes. Your guess is as good as mine. Some type of a processing drum that spun.
Yeah, they had to heat that line.
Yeah, they had to have ovens. It has to be
Yeah.
cooked.
Yeah. And I think them big barrels spin, and the line goes through there.
And here's a ventilation duct, maybe to take fumes or smoke away or something.
Can't imagine how loud that place must have been when it was in operation.
Right.
Everything ricocheting back at you from everywhere.
And it was dangerous then
Dust,
too,
yeah.
when it was operational. It was
Yeah.
dangerous.
Castley told me he had 20 employees there. And Castley didn't tell me, but Kurt Nickmeyer, who worked with Castley, he said there was 20 people working with Bob, and everybody shed blood there. Everybody got hurt. He said, I fell through a roof, down to the floor beneath it. And I was almost done with the project, I thought, after 2 months, 2.5 months. And I was thinking it might be my last day, and I fell and broke 4 ribs. And that was officially.
And it was your last day.
It was my last day, yeah. Because I was sneaking in on the weekends when they weren't working on it. And I knew they were demolishing it, during the week. And I knew, it's gonna be 6 weeks before I can photograph again. And, that was the end. This, I couldn't figure out what this was. And Kurt told me that is the company's attempt at purifying the air and getting the dust out of it. A vacuum would go through these fabric hoses, suck air into it, and then the dust would collect on the outside. And I would just assume that maybe they hit the thing with a shovel or a broom to get the dust off and shoveled it off or something. But it wasn't enough. I mean, people died from breathing silica dust. But this was an air purification system. And it was a chance to do an abstraction. The hoses are gone, but the holes where they went into it are there. And again, it's a semi-abstraction because you don't know really what it is. This is a good overall shot of the property. You can see the largest mound here, and a group of silos that are being buried by it. He busted a hole in right here, and I think he was going to put a spiral staircase down to the bottom of the silo underground, and then he could go through all 4 silos and out the front of the building. There's some graffiti here that says, "Remember Bob Castley." There's 2 stories about how Castley almost got killed in this location. One was he was out on this bridge welding with Kurt Nickmeyer, and it was summertime, and the hole inside of this circular structure was filled with dried reeds. They caught fire. And it turned into an inferno that went shooting way up into the air, and they had to run for their lives, you know, off of here. And there used to be a bridge here, that heavy bridge. And they had to wait for the flames to come down. There's another story where he was on this bridge and the bridge almost collapsed. Another shot of the general area. This is one of the few bridges that are left. I think he got these from barges. These are the gangplanks to barges on the Mississippi River. And I guess they would get old or something and they'd be replaced, and he was able to get a hold of them. Here's those concrete structures that he made that were stacked up in the basement. He made kind of a crown around the top of these silos. I don't know if he thought it looked like a castle, but here it is right here. At the City Museum, he had a cafeteria. I could imagine, you know, a cafeteria made out of this building and outdoor seating up here. Just my guess. And again, this was the lagoon where you could canoe. Here's those platforms that used to be on the cottonwood trees up in the air. And there's that building with the Gothic windows in it. Here's the lagoon again, and imagine there's 4 silos here in a row. This is the far silo. You canoe into here and go through every one of the silos and come out the other end. Would be a teenage kid's dream to be in this place. This is looking up the side, the 250-foot tall smokestack. And imagine a circular staircase winding its way up, maybe to this opening right here, and then a circular staircase winding itself around the thing all the way up to the top.
You have about 10 minutes left.
Okay. Here's his Chinese pagoda.
Those are the things, he inverted those, right?
Yeah, that's a funnel that he took out of the processing plant and inverted it and made a roof out of it. It's also my 35mm camera bag right here. I saw that and I thought, well, I can Photoshop it out, but I thought, what the heck, you know? You don't know what it is. Another shot of it. Here's that same building with the car jack on the other side. He actually had a master, older retired master stonemason come in and build these structures. And you saw this scene in the video.
He must have spent some money in that place.
Oh, that's one of the things I wanted to tell you. He spent 10 years working on this with 20 employees, and the way he financed it is that huge mound. He made arrangements with construction companies. They could dump their dirt there. Every time you build a building with a basement, there's dirt they have to get rid of. So construction companies from all over the area would come there with pickup with dump trucks full of dirt. He would direct them to the spot to dump it, and they would pay him per truckload.
And now I get it.
And at times, 100 trucks a day were arriving here.
Now
And I did some math. I just guessed, okay, maybe $100 a truckload.
Yeah.
It comes out to be over $1 million a year. And he worked here for 11 years, so he made at least $11 million just by them dumping dirt there.
Is any of it radioactive?
Who knows?
Probably is.
Bill Chrisman, who was another artist who worked with him, said that Cassidy was the only artist he knew that had a good business sense. Here's his bulldozer chassis again.
Yeah.
Here's part of the roof that caved in from the top of that little building. It's a Gothic window. This is interesting because I shot this with my iPhone, and I was going to come back and shoot it with either my 4x5 or my 35mm digital. I use perspective control lenses with my 35. But for some reason, I got distracted with 2 other shots, and I forgot to shoot this. And this is the only version of that I had. A friend of mine and my Photoshop guru for 20 years, John Nagel, he exhibited a 24 by 30 inch print that was sharp, and he told me that was from my iPhone. And I thought, wow, I've got thousands of iPhone shots. I have to take them all a lot more seriously, because this is in the exhibition and you can't tell the difference between this and a 4 by 5 enlargement.
Wow.
This is just outside that doorway, and this is where that heavy ramp, the heavy bridge was attached. And right here, I shot this because that heavy bridge made out of metal was held up by cables, steel cables, and there was a loop that hooked around this pole, this little pipe here. A loop right there and a loop there. Cassie was out in the middle of that suspension bridge, maybe jumping up and down or rocking it, but the pipe bent and the loops slid all the way up to the top and stopped. And the only thing that kept those loops from popping off and the whole bridge crashing with him on top of it was when you cut through a piece of metal like this, you generally get these little burrs on the end.
Yeah.
And the burrs kept the cables from coming off.
Wow.
So I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but there's a pattern of recklessness here that eventually, unfortunately, caught up with him. There was another, Kurt told me that he was at the bottom of the mound. He looked up and saw Cassie drive his bulldozer out on top of those silos that were being engulfed by it. Those are 80-year-old silos with old cracking concrete, and he drove his bulldozer out on top of it. It's just another instance. This is part of his castle complex. When I first saw this, I thought, that is a drawbridge for a castle with a moat. And the water level would have been higher so that you could have taken your canoe underneath the silos. And here's the silos. And imagine being in a canoe and going underneath this and being able to look up. You can see where he cut the funnel out. There's a cut line here. In the distance, you can see one funnel that's still there, and you took 3 of them out. But imagine being in the canoe down under here, looking straight up, and this is the top, 4 floors up. This is the top of the silo. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I'm running out of time. Another example of horizontals on the edges. More obscenities. This used to be very dark, but you could see the edge of the hole where he busted through and opened up the space. Enjoy this graffiti right here. This is looking straight up at the silos, up 4 floors. This is the last group of silos, a group of 8 silos with this building in between. This is inside there. It shows where he busted through.
What were the silos originally built for, do you know?
To hold either raw material for the concrete, maybe limestone. I think you also need gravel possibly for concrete, and sand. Coming up, there's another use for the silos that I'll show you in just a second. But imagine this goes up 4 floors here. Reminded me of catacombs, almost. With creative graffiti here. This is underneath the silos, and you can see the auger here. That it was a corkscrew, and the silos were above it, and so material would come out of the silos down into this auger and be corkscrewed out of the building. And right behind these 8 silos was a railroad, and so product could be put onto the railroad. They also owned, on the other side of Riverview, they owned the riverfront property where material could be put onto barges. I kind of enjoy this one. There's a door here, There's a door here, there's a door on the corner, and the graffiti says, "I wonder what's behind door number 1." It's way up high in that structure. You can see the cement dust on the walls. Castley was building a residence. He was going to live here. And this is up against that one silo with the crown around the top. And he was going to make this into his residence. There's a floor underneath this with a circular staircase coming up to it. But he ran into zoning problems where you can't have a residence in an industrial area. So he had to give it up, and he was not able to finish it. This probably would have been his porch, looking out over the whole site. This-
Surveyor's kingdom.
Yeah. This is, you can see the paddles that would stir whatever was in here. The photograph that I took that you could see the mound in the distance and the kind of an overall view, the way I got up to the top of the silo, this is the only way up right here.
5 more minutes.
Yeah, okay. This is at the bottom. This is the silos that are being engulfed by the mound. The mound is right here. This is inside that building, and when I saw this, I didn't know what it was for, but I could tell it was Castley's work because he busted a hole here. He put an auger there, and when Kurt Nickmeyer, when I had lunch with him, I showed him this photograph, and he said, "Oh, there's a great story about that. Castley busted through the first silo, and to his joy, he found out the entire silo was filled with cement powder. He had enough cement powder for all of his construction projects for years. All he had to do was auger the cement powder
Auger it out.
out of it out, and I guess maybe have a pickup truck pulled up to this or something. And so some of the silos had the concrete powder in it, the finished product. This is up on top of the silos. This is an original building they put holes in, and he built this structure right here. There's a close-up of it. Notice this stone here. I walked out and looked on this, and you know, that's Bob Castley. You know, never mind the fact that somebody's going to fall off of it one of these days, but that's just the same thing. Again, he busted holes through, and you can see the smokestack in the distance. I didn't include all this graffiti, but it said, "Buy guns, kill God, don't vote." The lagoon continued under this bridge over those silos over there, and then he built this stairway up to the top. This was inside a boiler that was made into a bridge. This is after the destruction started, and they started hauling dirt down and filling in the property, so you can see dirt being filled in here. The railroad tracks was right behind this building. This is a commercial building, not on his property, but the tracks were right behind this, and Kurt told me that there was going to be a day of reckoning with that mound. They were up there one day working, and there was a huge boulder up there that rolled down the mound and landed on the railroad tracks. And they had to run down and get this boulder off the railroad tracks before a train came. And at some point, there was going to be another 201st lawsuit against Castley. You know, that mound was too close to the railroad tracks. You can see the castle complex in the distance. Huge boiler was up there. What he was going to do with it, I don't know. I suspect he might have cut the ends off of it, put it vertically, then put a staircase up to the top of it, and had a platform up there. This was taken inside his workshop that burned down, and a couple of years after his death, his wife wanted to continue the site, possibly, but after his workshop burned down, she gave up. Then about 8 years later, she sold the property. He collected all sorts of stuff. These are globes from streetlights, I think, domes. My favorite piece of graffiti in the whole site. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
Was he buried someplace?
I don't know anything about his burial.
Were you gonna tell us how he passed?
Yeah, shortly showed you the mound where the bulldozer rolled down. He was working on a Saturday by himself, and he was in his bulldozer up on top of the mound, and all sorts of stuff got dumped up there by those construction companies. There was a big piece of flat concrete, larger than a bulldozer, that was smooth apparently, and it was slanting. And instead of going around it, he drove out on top of it. And if you imagine the treads of a bulldozer, it can grip soil, but it didn't have any grip on this concrete. It slid sideways until one tread of the bulldozer went over the edge, dug into the dirt, and flipped. And it flipped down the hill, and there was a cab inside. He was trapped inside the cab, and that's what killed him. His wife thought that there was foul play, and she hired a second coroner to do another autopsy, and the second coroner said that it was murder, and his justification for that was that there was not enough blood at the scene for the amount of blood that had left his body. But I talked to Kurt. Kurt was the second person on the scene, and he said it was an accident. There's no way that anybody could have faked that. First thing, if you had killed Castley and you were there trying to think of how to stage an accident, there's plenty of places where you could throw a body off the top of the 5th floor straight down to concrete. You wouldn't, first of all, if you did it in the bulldozer, you'd have to be in the bulldozer driving it. And there's just no logic to it. And plus, if you stood at the bottom and saw a piece of concrete up there, who would think, oh, I just know that a bulldozer would slide sideways and fall off of that and roll down the hill? It doesn't make any sense.
So since he was working on a Saturday, how quickly was he found, or how quick did they know that?
Fairly soon, I think. Kurt was the second person on the scene. He didn't say how long he had been dead. Maybe several hours, I don't know.
He was probably missing after a while.
Yeah,
His wife probably missed him.
yeah.
Or inquired about it maybe.
But he would work to midnight sometimes, so, yeah.
He missed dinner or something.
Yeah. It was during the day. I know Kurt said he was second on the scene, and it was in the day or the morning, I believe.
Well, thank you very much. That was amazing.
Enlightening.
If you've never been there, go to the City Museum in St. Louis.
And you're a little crazy for being in some of those places. Just saying. Just saying.
Your photographs were excellent, and we, in our social media promotion, we ran a quote by photographer Diane Arvis, and she said, I think it's really appropriate, that a photograph is a secret about a secret. The more it tells you, the less you know.
There you go. That's great.
And I thought it thematically kind of fit what you showed us tonight. I mean, there's like so many mysteries there, and your narration of it was excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
My choice of the black and white medium, whenever I do a project, there's always an initial decision. Am I going to do this in color or black and white? And some subjects only work in color or only work in black and white. Some subjects work in both. But I prefer the black and white medium. Elliot Irwin, a famous photographer, said, color is descriptive, black and white is interpretive. And I've always enjoyed that, and I agree with it.
What are the timelines? When did it start, like the City Museum and stop the City Museum and start this, and what's?
I used to take my young daughter to the City Museum starting in 1996, and that was several years after it opened. So it might have opened in 94?
Early 90s.
Early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, because